the success of like drug dealers who manage to survive and last for decades, and those who come in, make a whole lot of money, burn, go to prison, get killed really quickly, is that you have the ones who just float slightly under the radar. So as you said, runs a construction business. Most people would have seen him in work boots with cement all over his clothes. He looked like he was out working. Do you know what I mean? But he had a few quid. He lived in a big fancy house. He lived a nice lifestyle. But you just thought, rich culty builder. Do you know what I mean? And so that he got away with that for a very long time, albeit everyone in the criminal underworld knew who he was and what he was doing. But his neighbours wouldn't have. They wouldn't have known what he was doing.
And what you're seeing now is that this collection of major drug dealers along the border who've been convicted on the basis of Encrochat, who went to jail on the basis of Encrochat, or are awaiting sentencing on the basis of Encrochat, that's created a void. They're gone. Yeah. They're in prison. So the territory and the rackets that they once controlled them, they controlled them with iron fists. You now have got younger, often more violent drug dealers are coming in, and they're feuding between each other, and they're trying to take over that territory. And that's why you've seen so many shootings and incidents down in Newry. You had the murder of Wayne Boylan in 2019. You had the murder of Mark Lovell, the chicken. You had incidents where there was an attempt to decapitate a man with a hatchet in the Moorhill Road in Newry. You had another guy who had acid poured over his head and his arm broke. Allison mentioned it earlier on, the attempt at murder of Collie MacDonald, who was described in court as having links to organised crime. So this is all connected. This is all stems from Encrochat, from all the big players being arrested and jailed or facing charges. They aren't able to operate as major drug dealers with tags on their legs, with bail conditions and curfews. So you've got these younger ones coming in and taking over. And this is why we're seeing so much recent violence in Newry and along the border.
And you were talking as well, Ciaran, to obviously anonymous sources about this story for Sunday Life. So what is going to, I know you've talked a wee bit there about that's what's happening in the feuding. What is now going to happen, do you think, in the wake of him being arrested and the effect it's going to have on the other criminals?
The rackets that the chocolate ran and the drugs that he supplied, although the chocolate's in jail, the people who he was selling drugs to still want their drugs. So someone else is going to step into the chocolate shoes and sell those drugs. And but again, what does that call? What happens in 3 years' time when the chocolate gets out of jail? Does he try and reassert control of the rackets that he once had? And again, that could lead to more violence. So what you're seeing is now you're seeing a perfect storm where all these top drug dealers are going to prison at the same time. They're having to give up these rackets or put them in the care of someone else. And you're seeing violence and you're seeing feuding connected to younger criminals who want to take over and see the lifestyle and see the money that the likes of the chocolate and the bee man O'Callaghan had, and they want a taste of that. And that's why you're getting the violence in Newry at the moment.
Yeah, and it's a supply and demand business, and as long as there's demand, there'll always be a supply. They're getting better, the authorities, at closing down the routes, and we see like big, massive hauls being stopped at ports and things like that. But there's always, no one works harder than a criminal in order to try and bypass that. They'll close down one route, they just open up another one somewhere else. You stop drug dealing that's coming from, places like Morocco or Amsterdam, well then you just move somewhere else. You move into a different territory and bring them from there. And there'll always be, someone willing to step into that void and fill it. The problem is, you go to jail for a while, you can back out, your power base is gone, you have to reassert yourself. But also, he's now known, he can now be named as a drug dealer, he can't now float below the radar, and there's always someone else coming up who thinks they're bigger and they're harder. And he's, a man who's, now getting on in his years. Is he going to want to go to war with a load of 20-year-old drug dealers? I mean, I don't know. But that is the problem, is that he's now been unmasked. It's the problem is that everyone, including his neighbours, including everyone in Newry, now knows that he's not a guy who's making his money by building someone's extension.
If we had done this podcast 2 weeks ago, we would have only been able to refer to the chocolate.
Yeah.
Now we can refer to John, the chocolate McGivern. And Allison made a good point there about, older criminals coming out of jail and trying to reassert control. That happened to Malcolm McKeown. He tried exactly the same thing in mid-Ulster. He was a major drug dealer in around the Portadown area. He went to prison, comes out of prison, tries to take over his old rackets. I think he's only out of prison 2 weeks, and he's murdered by the firm, who are the new drug dealers in town. So, will that happen in Newry? Yeah, only time will tell.
Well, the thing about it is, once you've lived that lifestyle, how do you go back to living like a poor lifestyle? I mean, as I said, once you've tasted those riches, you cannot go back to living. No one is getting a job as a security guard in Asda here. Living off that wage. It's very difficult to go back, and that's why you see people who continue on with crime. And people will stop me in the street and go, "But why didn't they just go and live somewhere else?" Go, how can you? First of all, you need the money. Second of all, you now have a record that means you can't actually set up as a legitimate business person. You wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't be a person of good enough character. So they have to find another way to make that money and keep the family and keep the wife half the age of them and everything else.
And that is true, but I find that all the time. It's really hard for these people to go from 2 weeks all-inclusive in Dubai to 2 weeks and a 2-star hotel in Marmaris. You know,
I'd take the latter,
and the wife and the partner doesn't like that, and the kids don't like that. They want you by. They want fancy clothes and steak dinners.